Show, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
At the beginning of the 1960s, many new music artists emerged from Europe. America was substantially impacted by this trend, as seen by the sudden rise in popularity of British music. Artists like the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and The Who topped American charts for years.
This frontier, the British invasion, helped to build the counterculture movement in the U.S. in response to the Vietnam War and civil unrest in the United States. The movement ultimately contributed to the end of the war and ideas of freedom and peace among the people.
Back in the 1950s, the rise of rock and roll music already had its start and was gaining popularity. The skiffle-style music trend of the 50s was dying down and making a way for new sound. Music has permanently changed and adapted to trends and societal changes throughout history, and one example of this is during the British invasion. During the 1950s and 60s, American tensions were high due to the sudden assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. This, followed by the United States joining the war efforts in Vietnam, sent waves of pressure through the U.S. Not only that, but civil unrest was rampant among women and people of color. Women were fighting for equal pay in the workforce and an end to domestic violence, while people of color were demanding to be treated fairly in society. The civil rights movement was at its peak as people everywhere were fighting back against unfair laws. This nationwide turmoil in America set up for a great change in many ways.
People across the country used many vices as methods of coping and fighting back. Protest movements were prominent. People would march in the streets with signs and hold sit-ins in response to the injustice. In this new era, substances such as LSD and marijuana were widespread, especially in conjunction with music. Drug use led many to have spiritual awakenings, which only contributed further to a call for change. At the same time, across the pond, music in Europe was changing. Many new artists and bands were surfacing. This culminated in the perfect concoction for the British invasion. The anti-war movement, the beginning of hippie culture, and the civil rights movement, among others, created the perfect setup for a new sound. American teens, also known as the baby boomers, were looking for a soundtrack to match the protests. Therefore, many embraced British music as a way to express their inner frustrations with the social climate. Many bands created songs that were directly tied to the civil unrest in the world at the time. Such songs include Gimme Shelter by the Rolling Stones, Revolution by the Beatles, and Give Peace a Chance by John Lennon. Music that was directly related to the tensions, combined with excellent talent and catchy songs, created the perfect anthems for Americans of the time. One major event that many acknowledge as the official start of the British invasion was the Beatles' first trip to the United States in February of 1964. Their presence in America triggered a phenomenon known as Beatlemania. They became so popular that it was compared to a kind of mass hysteria. Although the Beatles were arguably the most popular band of the time, countless other bands also emerged and became widely popular. Other bands included the Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, The Who, The Kinks, The Zombies, The Animals, and many more.
This new collection of music became an expressive outlet, especially for the youth of America. Additionally, British fashion and trends were quickly swept up by America, mainly its teenagers. With this, American music had its own renewal of sound, and popular artists adapted their own sound to match. One major impact of the British invasion was how strong of an influence the British had on American counterculture. Songs about revolution, drugs, and more lit a fire in young Americans who wanted to bring about a change. And they did. Protests inspired by the current music, like Revolution or Give Peace a Chance, helped put forth many positive outcomes for America's future. Of course, this wasn't easy, as many conservative Americans did not care for the rebellious anthems of the Rolling Stones or psychedelic themes from the Beatles.
At all. We're not hated by all that many people, I'm sure, really.
I mean, you don't feel, for example, that when the mums and dads begin to say to their kids, go and see the Rolling Stones, you don't think that that'll be the kiss of death, as it were?
I don't think so. I don't think the parents say go and see anybody, quite that includes the Beatles. The kids just go.
Yes, they don't go and see them and they go.
Well, this is my point, surely. I mean, at the moment, the feeling is, the kids like you almost because their parents disapprove.
Plainly, it's apparent that British music fueled many movements, even if not always promoted. The youth is often the most influential generation. They're the future and have lots of impact on culture in the world. Because British music was especially popular among teens, ideas of peace and change were spread with even more power. Music was not only impacted, but art as well. Notably, Andy Warhol took influence from British culture and spread it throughout America and beyond. This, as well as music, contributed to the Anglophile craze, which was where British culture became very popular among Americans. The British influence didn't stop after the 70s. Subsequent invasions occurred in the 80s with Duran Duran, The Cure, Joy Division, and Boy George, where synth and electropop began to grow. The British invasion paved the way for current-day artists. British artists are more popular worldwide, and the current American music industry is fully supported by British artists like Harry Styles, Adele, and more.
Overall, it's clear that the impacts the British invasion had on the music industry, as well as controversial societal issues during the 1960s, continue to affect our lives today. Without the popularization of British artists, our culture as we know it would be completely different. Without the support of British artists, the counterculture movement would not have had as much of an impact on societal ideologies. We have the Americans from the time to thank for inciting a much-needed change to society through music and protests. It is clear to us as Americans that we have the power to create change and use things like media and music to voice our opinions. Music will forever be used as an outlet for change, and it is important to keep in mind how it can have the power and volume to make a lasting impact on our lives.
Jamendo.com